For our group case project, we researched Intel Corporation and its current situation. Next slide. Intel's purpose is to create world-changing technology that improves everyone's lives. To accomplish this, the company believes in driving innovation through the use of data and to deliver on its promises to its customers. Intel places a great emphasis on its customers and innovation, as already mentioned, but it also values inclusion, quality, and integrity. These serve as a guide for the company in its decision-making, setting goals, and serving its customers. Since its purpose is to improve the lives of everyone, it strives for a global impact by using its scale and resources to succeed in reaching its goals. Using its technology to enrich the lives of everyone on Earth is at the heart of its new brand message and identity. Now I will discuss Intel's general environment using pestle analysis. First, let's talk about its political factors. In President Biden's most recent State of the Union address, he recognized Pat Gelsinger, Intel's CEO, and mentioned the company's efforts to update their semiconductor manufacturing facilities. He also mentioned that Congress has been working on drafting a bill since 2021 that would help address the United States' concerns about semiconductor manufacturing. Intel is ready to invest heavily in manufacturing, but help from the government is essential if it has any hope of keeping up with the biggest competitors, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company and Samsung. It is also necessary to mention that the majority of semiconductors are manufactured in close proximity to China and within the flight path of the Chinese Air Force. So if geopolitical tensions were to grow between the US and China, this could prove problematic for the US and Intel, as both rely heavily on TSMC for its semiconductors. As for economic factors, Intel is facing higher costs currently due to inflation and current world events, like the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Due to higher oil prices, for example, Intel will deal with higher transportation costs to move its products. Sociocultural forces are also at play because we all rely heavily on things like smartphones, computers, TVs, and vehicles. All of these require semiconductors to operate. One important example for this area is electric vehicles and how the demand for them will increase over the following years as they become more commonplace. Intel has recently announced a new business division to serve electric and autonomous vehicles, and it also recently announced the acquisition of Tower Semiconductor to assist in this endeavor. Technological advancements are a factor in Intel's environment and a cause for concern since the company has fallen behind TSMC and Samsung in semiconductor manufacturing and performance. This is one reason it is investing billions in 2 new fabrication plants. Even so, Intel is unable to match the 2 competitors' capital expenditures, although funding from the government would not hurt its chances of catching up. Intel has 4 major environmental goals it hopes to achieve by 2030. They address water and energy use, carbon emissions, and waste. 2 examples are that it wants to achieve 100% renewable energy use across its global manufacturing operations and to achieve zero total waste to landfills, and to implement circular economy strategies for 60% of its manufacturing waste streams in collaboration with suppliers. Finally, Intel is not immune to legal and regulatory forces. 2 examples are antitrust law and patent law. Intel actually just won an antitrust case in January where it would have been fined $1.2 billion had it lost. However, in 2021, it lost a patent law case where the company had to pay over $2 billion. Now I will hand it off to Melanie, who will discuss Intel's industry environment.
Thanks, Bryce. In order to participate in this industry, a company must produce and sell microprocessors, and more specifically, semiconductor chips. There are a few large participants dominating this difficult-to-enter industry. Participants tend to hold high power over both the suppliers and the customers. Intel is the largest semiconductor company in the world. However, they have several close competitors. These competitors include, but are not limited to, Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, International Business Machines, IBM, NVIDIA, and Samsung. Moving on to the next slide, we'll discuss the competitive forces in this industry. First, we'll talk about the competition from the rival sellers. Due to the several close competitors that we previously mentioned and the growing demand and shortages in the semiconductor business, the competition force from rivals is considered strong. Competition from potential new entrants. This force is moderate as it is quite expensive and risky to enter the industry. However, new entrants do come along. Qualcomm is one example. Competition from producers of substitute products. This competition is weak to moderate. Every once in a while, Intel faces competition from producers of substitute products. An example here is Apple. Supplier bargaining power. This force is weak. Intel maintains a steady control of their suppliers due to their high market share in the semiconductor industry. In 2019, Intel reported using almost 16,000 suppliers from over 20 different countries. Customer bargaining power. Intel's customer bargaining power is considered weak. There are 3 main customers for Intel chips, and these are Dell Inc., Lenovo Group, and HP Inc. In 2020, these 3 buyers made up 39% of Intel's revenue. Now I'll hand it off to Natalie.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm going to analyze Intel's organization by looking at Intel's latest strategy, which is called IDM 2.0. It focuses on in-house manufacturing, third-party manufacturing, as well as the new Intel Foundry services to produce chips for other companies. For internal factory network, Intel will continue to manufacture majority of its products internally with the launch of its first 7-nanometer product, Meteor Lake, this year. As part of this endeavor, Intel is building new fabs in the United States and Europe, hoping to achieve less supply chain dependency on Asia. For external foundries, Intel will establish a unique competitive advantage by growing third-party manufacturing of modular tiles on advanced process technologies used for communications, connectivity, graphics, and chipsets. Finally, Intel is establishing a new standalone business unit, Intel Foundry Services, that will be differentiated in leading-edge process technology and packaging with committed capacity. This foundry business will provide manufacturing services beyond x86 architecture, such as ARM architecture. Intel's functional area strategies support Intel in strategy execution. Manufacturing expansion is achieved by building new factories and acquiring a $30 billion chip fab operation, Global Foundries. The value chain is restructured to make supply chain a separate unit, enabling revenue growth and new global partnerships. Intel is also continuing to invest heavily in research and development for innovative products, which has been Intel's competitive advantage over the years. And finally, Intel is now marketing their chips by renaming the nodes for more clarity and consistency with competitors. Next slide. As of 2021, Intel's revenue was strong at $79 billion with more than $160 billion in total assets, but we can see that revenue is starting to see a slowdown. Intel maintains a healthy cash flow on hand and at about $11 billion, which helps fund its strategy. Therefore, Intel is financially healthy and strong enough to withstand business slowdowns and recessions. Thank you. I'm going to hand this over to Omowale.
Thank you, Natalie. Listed here are some of the problems Intel is facing. Intel continues to outsource manufacturing of some of its chips. Cloud computing has stolen a lot of data center hardware capacity, a market almost completely dominated by Intel. Chinese companies are trying to develop their own processors in response to the on and off sanctions against US chips. Intel has had repeated delays in moving to these latest chip manufacturing technologies. Intel continues to lose more percentage points of share in the server processor market and in PC business. Notwithstanding the foregoing problems, Intel's opportunities include the IoT sector, which is still anyone's game. So Intel can still reinvigorate products to capitalize on IoT growth. Intel can develop products for the mobile market, considering the lack of successful Intel processors for mobile device. Non-traditional tech companies will be strong forces in edge computing that will seek partnerships with embedded technology providers such as Intel, so Intel should partner with them. All AI market is hot at the moment. Intel can prioritize investment to gain share in the high-performance AI computer market. In the future, you can have a processor optimized to a very specific purpose, and it will be economical with great performance. Intel needs to make itself the household name for such products. Next slide, please. Strategic alternatives. Intel should invest heavily in factories that will make chips designed by outside companies to be able to compete directly with TSMC. In the alternative, Intel can focus on expanding factories to develop exclusive Intel product, roll back outsourcing of chip manufacturing, design, develop, manufacture, and distribute Intel products. Over to Cedric.
Thank you, Omowale. I will be talking about the evaluation tools we use for our strategic alternatives. To evaluate our two alternatives, we use a SWOT analysis. For the SWOT analysis for the Foundry Focus Plan, the strengths are broader market opportunities. They will be able to seize on the short-term capacity limitations of TSMC, as well as supply for the long-term demand for more foundries. For weaknesses, we have a high upfront cost and high domestic labor costs for when they operate in the US, and that's also a shared weakness with the vertical integration plan. We also have the weakness of the geopolitical relationships regarding rare earth materials, specifically to the Foundry Focus Plan. For opportunities, each alternative has the opportunity to seize on the US government's pledge of $52 billion for chip manufacturing in the US, but they have the unique opportunities of working with NVIDIA, who have already expressed interest to use Intel as a foundry, and as well as just enjoying the high operating margin and net income possibilities. For threats, if they were to shift to a foundry focus, Apple continued to use TSMC, as well as any other company shifting to TSMC instead of using Intel as a foundry is a huge threat, as well as AMD gaining a larger market share of the microprocessor market instead of using Intel as a foundry. For the vertical integration strengths, we have the public perception of Intel controlling more of their supply chain, as well as just them being able to reinforce their supply chain to meet the global demand. For a unique weakness with the vertical integration is them investing to produce their own chips, but then continuing to lose market share for those chips they just produced. And a unique opportunity for the vertical integration is to seize the immediate shortage of microprocessors that they are incapable of meeting with the current setup. And for threats, if TSMC were to gain Intel's customers such as HP, Dell, or Samsung as a foundry, that would be a threat to their vertical integration, as well as just geopolitical supply chain relations between the US and China. For the choice of a strategic alternative, we utilize a foundry. We chose Foundry Focus. It has a higher profitability. You can look at the success of TSMC as a foundry, and to be able to replicate that for Intel is better than them to utilize the vertical integration to have higher revenues, higher gross margin, and a higher operating cost and net margin. This will also allow them to capitalize on the chip shortage, not just for microprocessors for computers, but for all of the industries such as Internet of Things, as well as the automobile industry. The rising chip prices will allow them to easier break into the market, and the companies do want more choices for outsourcing, so Intel will be able to provide that. And now I will pass it off to Isaac.
Thank you, Cedric. So to implement this, Intel will really need to have a heavy focus on their foundry infrastructure. They're going to need to do this by obviously having a lot of internal investments, but also looking to do acquisitions of foundries on a global level to really scale up to compete with TSMC. So internally, Intel is already looking to pledge $20 billion into an Ohio facility for chip manufacturing. And they're also internally looking to invest $27 billion into fabrication technologies and other research and development to continue to be technologically advanced going into the future. As well as we previously stated a few times, the United States federal government is looking to invest $52 billion towards the chip industry within the United States, and currently positioning Intel to become a true foundry and manufacturer of chips. Intel would look to gain almost all of those $52 billion from the federal government. And this would roughly put just alone domestic investment into this strategic alternative at $100 billion. As well, to acquire some foundries on a global level and make sure that distribution can reach all markets of the globe. Intel has recently acquired Tower Semiconductor in Israel for $5.4 billion. And again, just having this foundry in place will allow Intel the ability to manufacture chips for different clientele and distribute it on a global scale. And finally, to be competitive and to really make sure this implementation goes off well, they'll need to market to old rivals to compete directly with TSMC, become a foundry for US and foreign companies such as NVIDIA. To conclude, Intel is at a crossroads. As we've stated before, they've recently lost market share. They're highly dependent on outsourcing during a chip shortage, but the company is in really good financial health. So the solution is to reshape into a foundry-focused organization. And the reasons for this are because there's high demand for new foundries. Foundries are extremely profitable, and Intel is in a stable enough financial situation to make this pivot. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And now we'll open it for questions.